Hello, everybody. Hope you're all keeping fine. So, this is my second session of reproductive physiology, and might be this is the concluding session with me because the next part of the reproductive physiology will be taken up by Dr. Shwasti Banerjee, where she'll give you the idea about the pregnancy, lactation, and contraceptions. But unfortunately, I could not arrange for any doubt clearing sessions in between because your nervous system classes were going on, and also because now there is some COVID issue and they have kept the telemedicine department closed for 2 weeks. So go through the video, post your queries, maybe in my mail also if you can't post in the form. And if I find that there are several queries, maybe I'll be arranging for some doubt clearing sessions in a later date. So thanking you for looking up the videos. Let me share the screen. Today's session is mainly on the reproductive physiology, that is the hormones. The gonadal hormones we want to discuss today and their effect on the menstrual cycle. So our learning objective today will be the female gonadal hormones, the estrogen, progesterone, their source, function, and mechanism of action, and all, definitely the biosynthesis. Next, we'll go to the HPG axis and how the hypothalamo pituitary gonadal axis helps in regulation of the gonadotrophic hormone as well as pituitary and gonadal hormones. And last but not the least, this is the most important part, that is the hormonal regulation of the menstrual cycle. So coming to the gonadal hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone, we know that estrogen is most important feminizing hormone secreted from ovary, and it induces estrus, because in many animals they do not have this cyclical ovulation. Only after the copulation or in certain seasons they undergo this ovulation, and this is under the influence of increased estrogen, so it is called the estrus, and hence the name estrogen. Progesterone, pro-gestation, so they favors the pregnancy. Progesterone is being discovered later to estrogen in 6 years earlier to that of progesterone, and they are definitely the steroidal hormones, the natural hormones available in human body. For estrogen, it is estrone, estriol, and estradiol, whereas in progesterone it is progesterone and 19-nortestosterone. This is also a form of natural progesterone. There are several synthetic estrogen and progesterone, of which in estrogen, the ethinyl estradiol is very, very important. And there are certain non-steroidal compounds also. But what we are more interested is in certain compounds which are called SERM, that is selective estrogen receptor modulators. We'll come to this, the tamoxifen, raloxifene. They are selective estrogen receptor modulators. And definitely there are synthetic progesterone as well. And the actions we'll discuss in details in subsequent slides. So coming to the estrogen, as I was telling you, that estrogen in natural form is estradiol, estrone, and estriol, and they are being arranged as the abundance they are obtained in premenopausal women. Estradiol is the most abundant estrogen in the premenopausal woman, responsible for all the reproductive activities, and it is actually the 17 beta estradiol which is most potent and mainly secreted from the granulosa cells of ovary. actually the androstenedione, the raw material is supplied by theca cells, and it is the granulosa cells under the influence of aromatase. They produce estradiol to be secreted in blood. But besides that, placenta also secretes estrogen, placental estrogen, and corpus luteum also secretes estrogen in the form of estradiol. Now, the level of estradiol in the individual varies between 15 to 350 picogram per ml in a premenopausal woman. And the level definitely varies with the different phases of the ovarian or uterine cycle. Now, estrone is a metabolite of estradiol. Actually, it is an oxidized form of estradiol, and its potency is 1/3 of that of estradiol, 17-beta estradiol. And it is also obtained by conversion from androstenedione, like that of estradiol, and is mainly produced in the peripheral tissues like in the brain, bone, adipose tissue, skin, etc. So, estradiol is also produced in the peripheral tissues, but more of estrone. Okay, and estrone is a primary estrogen after menopause. After menopause, the health of the uterus, vagina, they are being maintained by estrone. So, the estrone in postmenopausal women is usually around 35 picogram per ml. Now coming to estriol. This is the weakest estrogen known, and it is also a metabolite of estriol, mainly metabolized in the liver. And it is found in traces in normal adult female, but it is most abundant and found in significant amounts during pregnancy. Because in pregnancy, 90% of estriol is being formed in the fetal liver. So this estriol actually, when measured in the urine of pregnant mother, is an important index of fetal health. It varies from early pregnancy 4 nanomole per liter to about 40 nanomole per liter at birth. And low estriol indicates certain chromosomal or congenital anomaly in fetus like Down syndrome or Edwards syndrome. So estriol is an important marker of fetal health and is mainly produced by, not by placenta. Actually, it comes through the placenta into the maternal circulation, but it is produced mainly in the fetal liver. So it speaks of the fetal health. Next, one of the very important synthetic estrogen is ethinyl estradiol, and it has less first pass metabolism. That is, first the steroid hormone congeners are being disintegrated in the intestinal tract by the intestinal enzymes, but it happens to resist this intestinal digestion, and so can be administered orally. And at lower doses, it has prolonged activity and can replace estradiol for many purposes. But what we are more interested is in SERM, that is selective estrogen receptor modulators, because estrogen is definitely the most important feminizing hormone of the body, of a female body, but it definitely has certain bad effects. Especially it is high levels of estrogen for long time may predispose an individual to breast or endometrial carcinoma. So if we have certain agents which selectively acts, say on bone, say on brain, but not on breast or endometrium, then definitely they can block the estrogen effect because they bind with the estrogen receptors, but do not bring the activity. That is, it has both estrogenic function on certain areas like bone or endometrium, so that in a normal reproductive woman, the endometrial health is maintained, but it has anti-estrogenic effect on breast. So this can be very comfortably used in breast malignancy, even in a premenopausal woman, because it has anti-estrogenic effect. It binds with the estrogen receptor but does not bring about the estrogen activity. So the breast proliferation is being stopped, but it has other estrogen, because estrogen is a very important hormone. So this SERM are now getting great prominence, like tamoxifen, raloxifene, and so now breast cancer is within our control. Now, so the estrogens, we have seen that it is estradiol, where we have seen the same cyclopyrrolophenanthrene ring, where we find that they are hydroxylation at the 3 beta position and 17 beta position. Okay, so this is the same cyclopyrrolophenanthrene ring. And this estradiol may be converted into estrone, where there is only the keto group added at the 17 beta position, no more hydroxyl group at the 17 beta position. So this is a metabolite, which is the estrone, and they are interconvertible by the enzyme 17 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. And estriol, we all know that it is also a metabolite of estradiol produced in brain, liver, and it is under the influence of the hormone 16 alpha hydroxyestrone. 16 alpha hydroxyestrone, it is present in the adult liver, also in the fetal liver, and this estriol is being produced where there is a hydroxylation at the 16 alpha position. So coming to what we have said, that this estriol is produced in the fetal liver. You see that cholesterol in mother, they can go to form pregnenolone and DHEAs, and DHEA is also formed in the adrenal cortex. In maternal liver, under the influence of 16 alpha hydroxy steroids, that is also the 16 alpha hydroxyestrone, we see that a small amount of estriol is produced. But in fetal circulation, we see that the DHEAs of fetal adrenal from the cholesterol, or the cholesterol supplied by from the maternal blood, they from the adrenal, they go to the liver, and here in the presence of 16 alpha hydroxyestrone, we find that large amount of E3 or estriol is produced, and it comes into the maternal circulation, and even the estradiol and the estrone is being converted into E3 in the fetal liver. So 90% of this estriol comes from the fetal liver, and only 10% is being contributed by the mother. So this estriol measurement in the maternal urine gives us an idea about the fetal health. Now then, biosynthesis of this sex steroids. Now we have already known about the two-cell theory, where the theca cell produces the raw material, that is from DHEA, the androstenedione, it crosses the basement membrane, the basal lamina, and enters into the granulosa cell from the theca cell. And here we see that pregnenolone is the main pathway, where pregnenolone is converted into 17-hydroxypregnenolone, and from there DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, is being formed. And then in androstenedione, which in the presence of 17-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, it should be D, not B, it may be converted to testosterone, which in presence of aromatase CYP19, it is being converted into estradiol. Or this androstenedione directly under the influence of aromatase is converted into estrone, and then in presence of 17-beta HSD, it may be converted to estradiol. So this is the theca and the granulosa cells under the influence of LH and FSH. They are producing large amount of estradiol and some amount of estrone. Besides this, in the luteal phase, when the corpus luteum develops, we see that it from the pregnenolone, it forms directly progesterone because of enough of 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. in the corpus luteum, that a large amount of progesterone is produced, and some of it is converted into by 17 alpha hydroxylase into hydroxyprogesterone, and then they may enter into adrenal cortex to produce the cortisol and aldosterone. But in adrenal cortex also, they can produce the aldosterone, testosterone, and estradiol. Or from the corpus luteum, they are entering, this is the thicker lutein cells, and these are the granulosa cells to produce the estradiol. So in the corpus luteum, large amount of progesterone is being formed, which comes into the bloodstream, and also estradiol during the luteal phase of pregnancy. Whereas in the follicular phase of menstrual cycle, it is mainly via the pregnenolone that this estradiol or estrone is formed. Here, minimum amount of progesterone is formed. When thicker cells are much proliferated, then only small amount of progesterone comes into the blood. Otherwise, it is mainly secreting or synthesizing the estradiol and the estrone. So we see in the follicular phase, it is the pregnenolone is the precursor, and it is going to form the androstenedione, which is going to cross the thicker cells into the granulosa cells to form the estrone or the 17-beta estradiol. Whereas in the luteal phase, we find it is the pregnenolone which gets converted into progesterone. So the progesterone comes into action, and then this progesterone forming 17 alpha hydroxyprogesterone goes into androstenedione to produce the estrone and beta estradiol, and very small metabolites in liver in the presence of 16 alpha hydroxyestrone that the estriol is formed. So this is in a nutshell the biosynthesis of the estrogen and progesterone. Then the mechanism of action of the steroid hormones. Now, estrogen has two receptors, two isoforms, ER alpha and ER beta. Similarly, progesterone has also two receptors, PRA and PRB. Now, they are, because they are steroid hormones, they predominantly act through the nuclear receptors, and their receptors are in the cytoplasm are bind to the heat shock protein. Now, once the steroid hormone binds with the receptor, this heat shock protein gets dissociated and they undergo homodimerization. That is the similar two receptor hormone units, they form the dimer. So it's a homodimerization in order to translocate into the nucleus. And now it combines with the gene response elements. In case of estrogen, it is the estrogen response elements. In progesterone, it's a progesterone response element. And it will activate the transcription machinery. So the pre-mRNA is formed, and finally in the cytoplasm, in the ribosomes, the mRNA is being formed. So the transcription occurs, and now in the ribosome, it is being translated to the new protein, which will bring about the response. So this nucleus binding, the receptor hormone complex, when it binds with the response elements, they regulate the gene transcription, leading to new protein synthesis. So here is the estradiol now, and here is the estradiol receptor. Mostly the alpha or beta may be present, so bound with the heat shock protein. Once the estradiol binds with the receptor, heat shock protein gets dissociated, lives in the cytoplasm to accept more estrogen receptors, and now they undergo dimerization. So this is homodimerization in order to translocate to the nucleus and bind to the estrogen response element. And once they get bound to the estrogen response element, we see that the several transcriptions are being produced, the transcription factors are produced, this mRNA is produced, and mRNA comes into the ribosome in the cytoplasm, and finally the decoding of the transcription occurs, that is known as translation, and ultimately the new protein is formed. And these new proteins bring about the diverse function of estrogen and progesterone in the female body. Now coming to the estrogen effects in the brain, estrogen not very important. It's progesterone which maintains the body temperature. Progesterone is a thermogenic hormone, and it raises the basal body temperature by 1 degree, as we have already discussed. But most important in brain is it binds in the hippocampus level and induces formation of new synapses throughout the brain, and so it improves the memory and the learning functions. It is seen that in estrogen deficiency there is deficit in declarative memory, and moreover there are some subtle motor incoordination in estrogen deficiency, and in both male and female estrogen maintains the normal libido. That is also very, very important. Now coming to the reproductive organs like ovary, vagina, uterus, where we find that in ovary, it helps in maturation of the Graafian follicles. That is very, very important. And when only the estrogen comes, there is the beginning of menarche. And in the uterine endometrium, we see that during the proliferative phase, it helps in the proliferation, huge proliferation of the functional layer of the endometrium. And it increases the bulk of the muscles. And in cervix also, we find that there is copious watery alkaline secretion, which helps in the sperm motility and sperm nutrition. And in vagina, there is non-cornification. It stimulates the maturation of vagina and maintains the lubrication. But more important is that estrogen is a feminizing hormone and helps in the development of external genitalia and also female distribution of fat in hips and breasts. The typical female distribution of fat is seen under the influence of estrogen hormone, and even the hair distribution in scalp or the pubic hairs, they are also under the sole influence of estrogen. So estrogen is one of the very important feminizing hormone. Now coming to the bones, it has very important function on bones, where we see that the estrogen inhibits the osteoclastic activity. This is most important. Progesterone increases the osteoblastic activity, and also in estrogen also to some extent stimulates the osteoblastic activity, but its more important function is inhibiting the osteoclasts. So it can stimulate the bone growth. And even more stronger effect is the union of the epiphysis with the shaft of the long bones. So in females, we see because the estrogen comes earlier, the growth stops earlier. So it inhibits the osteoclastic activity and stimulates the bone growth by inhibiting osteoclastic activity. And definitely there will be an increase in the osteoblastic activity. But we see that there is early union of the epiphysis with the shafts of the long bone. So in female, they have a shorter stature because their growth stops earlier. And in female eunuch, they are taller. And in after menopause, the osteoporosis, post-menopausal osteoporosis, which is very common, is because there is no estrogen, there is increased osteoclastic activity. So the subtle balance between the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts is lost, and the bone matrix formation decreases. That is very important. It is not due to the deficiency of the minerals, but because the bone matrix formation is defective, we see the incorporation of the minerals also become defective, and so the bones become weak, and so there are vertebral fractures, common malunions are seen. But the protein deposition is more in testosterone than in the estrogen. But still, estrogen has a very important function in bone growth during the growth spurt and early pubertal life, and postmenopausal osteoporosis is also due to the estrogen deficiency, and this can be also created by the compounds like tamoxifen, because it has a estrogen-like activity on the bone receptors. Another important function of estrogen is on the lipid metabolism. That is very, very important function, that it increases the high density lipoprotein, which is said to be a good lipid. High density lipoprotein concentration is increased, and it lowers the total cholesterol as well as LDL cholesterol. This is actually the pre-runner of the atherosclerosis, because earliest event which occurs is when there is intimal injury, this LDL gets deposited. LDL gets deposited in the intima of the blood vessels, and subsequently there is inflammatory reactions followed by proliferation of the intimal. There is thickening of the intimal layer, and that's why the blood vessel gets narrowed, and now the platelets may aggregate, small clot formations may be there, and the deposition of the atherogenic plaques may be there, and that will lead to atherosclerosis. So because of this important effect on the lipid metabolism, that is, it increases HDL and lowers LDL, the atheromatous plaque formation is quite uncommon in case of premenopausal women. Besides, it has the vascular effects as well. That is, the estradiol itself is an antioxidant. It has antioxidant effects on the blood vessels. That is very important. Nitric oxide itself also has antioxidant effect. That is, the oxidant sensitivity to the superoxide anion and the reactive oxygen species is decreased by the estradiol. Now, nitric oxide we find is increased. The ENO, the nitric oxide synthesis, which produces endothelial nitric oxide, is increased due to the estradiol effect. And that is a potent vasodilator, we know. So even if the blood vessel is narrowed due to atheromatous plaque, because of the vasodilatation, relaxation of the smooth muscle, it is not blocked completely. Besides, as I was telling you, this lipid deposition causes a proliferative effect on the intimal cell due to the pseudo-inflammatory effects. So this anti-proliferative effect of estradiol is very important in decreasing the formation of atheromatous plaque. And it also has some antiplatelet effect. So altogether will produce an anti-atherogenic effect, and that is why the premenopausal women are less predisposed to the cardiovascular diseases or cardiovascular risks. And as vasodilator, it also dilates the blood vessels, the spiral blood vessels of the uterine endometrium. Not only nitric oxide, also prostacyclins, PGE2, they decreases or counterbalances the activity of endothelin-1, which is a very strong vasoconstrictor. So there is smooth muscle relaxation, and that affects not only the blood vessels of heart, brain, kidney, but also the uterine endometrium. So this is also a very important effect of estrogen, and this helps in cardioprotection. Now then, progesterone, it's also a steroid hormone, and progestation. So we know that it is the helps or favors pregnancy, and here the same mechanism of action as that of estrogen, where the receptor PRA and PRB are binding with the heat shock protein, and subsequently they are acting via the nuclear receptors. Now, they are secreted principally from the corpus luteum. Subsequently, the placenta also produces progesterone like that of estrogen, and adrenal cortex, because this is a pre-runner of aldosterone, cortisol, or the androstenedione. So some amount of progesterone is definitely also produced by the adrenal cortex. Now, among the function of progesterone, it has very important function on the reproductive system. We have already mentioned that in the uterine endometrium and the secretory phase, there are glycogen-laden glands for the nutrition of the embryo. It decreases the contractility, helps in development of the spiral arteries, and prepare the uterus for the ovum implantation. And in the breast, we find in case of estrogen, it helps in ductular proliferation of ducts, and definitely also the fat deposition in the breast. But in progesterone, it helps in the lobular and alveolar proliferation. Prepares the breast by proliferation of the lobules and the alveoli. And we have already mentioned about the thermogenic effect of progesterone, and it also influences the brain. It increases appetite. There are mood elevations, and so in postpartum cases, due to sudden drop of progesterone, we find there may be depression, and it helps in natriuresis. So estrogen on one hand has a pro-aldosterone effect. It conserves water and salt, but progesterone does the opposite. So if we just compare between the estrogen and progesterone effect, we see that the estrogen helps in endometrial proliferation to such an extent that it exposes the individual to the risk of endometrial cancer. Whereas progesterone maintains the secretory phase. Not that much of mitotic index is raised, not that much of proliferation. Rather, the glands get more of glycogen, the spiral vessels, they get more of circulations, and so it has also a preventive measure of the endometrial cancer. Similarly, it leads to stimulation of the breast estrogen and breast cancer. As we have said, the tamoxifen has a great role in breast cancer nowadays, and progesterone rather protects the fibrocystic disease of breasts as well as prevent breast cancer. So in that way, the progesterone is a protective hormone. And progesterone helps in utilizing fat energy, whereas estrogen increases the fat as well as helps in fat distribution. Now, estrogen has an increased risk of gallbladder diseases in women. Women are more commonly exposed to gallbladder disease, and that is because of the estrogen. But there is no counterbalancing effect of progesterone on this. Now, estrogen, as we said, that it restrains the osteoclastic activity. So the osteoblastic activity increases and there is bone matrix formation. In progesterone, we find that they promote the osteoblastic activity. So they are acting in conjunction for the bone growth. And estrogen reduces the vascular tone because of nitric oxide, PG, E2, prostacyclin, etc. And progesterone does not increase, but restores the vascular tone. And estrogen has increased clotting risk. The clotting factors are increased to some extent, but does not increase the clot risk really. But there is no increased clotting risk for progesterone. So progesterone is definitely a counterbalancing hormone for estrogen, and it is a protective one helping in gestation. So with this background knowledge of gonadal hormones, let us see how the hypothalamus-pituitary-gonadal axis helps in regulation of the secretion of these hormones. Now, from hypothalamus, as we all know, the gonadotropic releasing hormone is being liberated. There are two main nuclear groups. One is the preoptic nucleus, mainly stimulating the LH secretion, and one is the arcuate or the infundibular nucleus, from where the FSH secretion is being stimulated. So under the influence of GnRH hormone, the gonadotrophs secreting LH and FSH are being stimulated, and so there is increased secretion of LH and FSH. And we have said how in puberty, this GnRH, which was under total inhibition is being disinhibited. The kisspeptin neurons are being disinhibited, leading to increased secretion of FSH-LH. Now, FSH most importantly helps in folliculogenesis, and as the follicles develop, the inhibin hormone increases. Activin and follistatin. Follistatin is inhibitory, activin is stimulatory for the pituitary, but this acts only on the pituitary, and inhibin mainly inhibits the FSH secretion. Due to folliculogenesis, estrogen, mainly the estradiol, is being formed mostly, and in very later stages, progesterone. Progesterone rather is formed. LH surge causes ovulation, and subsequently in the luteal phase from corpus luteum, large amount of progesterone and estrogen is also formed. This estrogen progesterone helps in inhibition of pituitary and hypothalamus as well. But you see, there's two positive sides. That is, not only they always inhibit the hypothalamus pituitary axis, but there are times when especially the estrogen can stimulate the hypothalamus pituitary for the LH surge. But it is interesting to note that hypothalamic GnRH neuron does not have any estrogen or progesterone receptors. So how does it act? Now, it is seen that the arcuate nucleus of hypothalamus have more of KNDY neurons. KNDY means kisspeptin, neurokinin B, and dynorphin. These are the three neurotransmitters secreted from these neurons. So they are called the KNDY neurons. And the preoptic areas, they are predominantly having the kisspeptin neuron. This kisspeptin or KNDY neurons, they show the expression of the estrogen receptors. Okay, so the estrogen acting through this KNDY neuron or the kisspeptin neuron either stimulate or inhibit the GnRH neuron for its pulsatile secretion. Okay. Now, going back to our puberty session, where we have said that if this is the GnRH neuron, then two groups of neuron. One is the KNDY, kisspeptin, neurokinin B, dynorphin neuron, which is in the infundibular area. Now, this arcuate or infundibular area is mainly concerned with secretion of FSH. Okay. Now, here this neuron is inhibited by dynorphin, whereas neurokinin B and kisspeptin, they are stimulatory. But dynorphin is so strong that it can inhibit both the action of neurokinin B as well as kisspeptin. So if dynorphin is stimulated, then KNDY receptors are inhibited from secreting the kisspeptin as well as neurokinin B. The other area is the preoptic area, which is mainly concerned with the secretion of LH. And here it is under the inhibition of GnIH neuron secreting the RP3 we have already discussed. And this is also under the influence of GABA, NPY, or endogenous peptides, opioids. These are the inhibitory ones, and the glutamate or norepinephrine, which are the stimulatory ones. Now you see, interestingly, that the stress or the estrogen mainly affect the KNDY neuron. That is, they affect by increasing the dynorphin or the dopamine secretion, so that the KNDY neuron is inhibited, and so the secretion of FSH is relieved. Whereas the preoptic area, this kisspeptin neuron is inhibited by the beta endorphin secreted by progesterone. So it is a endogenous opioid, beta endorphin, which is increased level of beta endorphin seen in preoptic area due to progesterone secretion. And progesterone also increases the effect of GnIH, gonadotrophin inhibitory neuron. So progesterone mainly affects the secretion of LH or reduces the secretion of LH, whereas estrogen or stress, we can definitely see that they influences the KNDY neuron. So there are 1001 factors affecting this feedback mechanism. Sex steroids, we have already been telling, estrogen, progesterone besides testosterone. Then acute or chronic inflammation, stress, drugs like opioids, as I was telling you, or the metabolism, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, these sorts, they are all affecting the KNDY neuron. That is, they are affected, acting through the increased dynorphin level, so that the kisspeptin and the neurokinin B is inhibited. And if neurokinin B and kisspeptin is inhibited, GnRH neuron gets inhibited. So they are acting by the KNDY receptors. Whereas the GnIH or the sex steroids, estrogen is not correctly written, it should be progesterone and some amount of testosterone also, mainly acts via the RFRP3 or the endogenous opioids, and they inhibit directly the kisspeptin neuron. They inhibit the kisspeptin neuron. So they are affecting more of LH secretion. So the sex steroid, that is estrogen, have both the stimulatory effect on the GnRH neuron, as well as it has the inhibitory effect on the GnRH neuron. So if we come to this slide, we see that this is the GnRH neuron secreting GnRH at the hypothalamo hypophyseal portal system, going to the gonadotrophs, secreting LH and FSH. FSH mainly regulating the granulosa cell proliferation, maturation of oocyte, and here also the kisspeptin acts, and it is the under the LH that theca cells, they develop an activated secreting androgen, and definitely also the corpus luteum is being maintained. And this estrogen, as well as later stages progesterone come, they have positive and inhibitory effect on the pituitary, but it is mainly the inhibin or activin which acts for the inhibition of the FSH secretion. In the hypothalamus, we see that estrogen directly acts on the KNDY neuron for its inhibitory action on the FSH. Okay, and it has a stimulatory effect on the kisspeptin neuron for the LH surge. But progesterone separately can inhibit the kisspeptin neuron via the beta endorphin, which is a endogenous opioid, or by increasing the GnIH inhibitory effect. But estrogen, it has been clearly shown that it has affects the inhibitory influence on hypothalamus by acting on KNDY neurons, dynorphin, and that mostly helps in secretion of FSH. So estrogen has major feedback on FSH, and it is progesterone which has a feedback on the inhibition of the kisspeptin neuron. Estrogen rather stimulates the kisspeptin neuron. AVPV is in the primates, not in human. It is the preoptic area, which is mainly responsible for LH secretion. So a positive feedback of estrogen will give rise to the LH surge. It is seen that if estrogen is moderately raised, it leads to inhibition of KNDY neurons. But if it is very high, say 300 picogram per ml, and this level persists for more than 36 hours, approximately 48 hours, if 300 picogram per ml of estrogen is being secreted, then we find that the kisspeptin neuron gets stimulated. There is a large mRNA formation for the kisspeptin neuron, and there is strong stimulation of this GnRH neuron, especially of the preoptic area, and this gives rise to huge LH surge. The FSH surge is also there, but LH burst is very high, leading to the ovulation. So now we'll come to the phases of menstrual cycle, which we have already discussed: pre-ovulatory follicular phase in ovarian cycle, and luteal phase is the post-ovulatory phase. Whereas in uterine cycle, pre-ovulation, it begins with the periods, that is the menstrual cycle for 1 to 5 days, and next is the proliferative phase, pre-ovulatory, and post-ovulatory, it is the secretory phase. And as we have said, this follicular phase is notoriously variable. It may be 14 days up to 20 days, this follicular phase may prolong. whereas luteal phase is fixed, 14 days. So if it is a 20-day follicular phase cycle, then the total menstrual cycle will be of 34 days. So it's a long cycle. Up to 34 days, it's normal. More than 35 days, it is the menorrhagia. So along with the follicular phase, definitely the proliferative phase also varies in duration. Now coming to the most important session of our discussion today, that is the hormonal effect on the ovarian and the uterine cycle. Now let us begin with a menstrual phase of the uterine cycle, where we find that the estrogen and progesterone has gone down due to the luteolysis of the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum was in the secretory or the luteal phase. It is the corpus luteum which is secreting the estrogen progesterone. Now, once it undergoes luteolysis to form corpus albicans, we find there is sharp fall of the estrogen progesterone. So this is the ovarian hormone level, estrogen, inhibin, and progesterone, whereas this is the gonadotrophic hormones, the FSH and LH. And this is the ovarian cycle, the events of ovarian cycle, and these are the events of uterine cycle. So during menses, there is a lowering of estrogen progesterone, absolutely low levels of estrogen progesterone. So there is the negative feedback of estrogen progesterone on the FSH or LH is no more there. As we have seen that estrogen has a very strong negative feedback on FSH and progesterone on the LH. So as both estrogen progesterone has gone down, there is no inhibition of the LH and FSH. Now LH level is a steady basal level, whereas FSH level increases during the early follicular phase, and under its influence, it is the follicle which maturates, and we find that after the theca cells are formed, we find that the estrogen level gradually increase, because theca cells has to supply the estradiol precursor to the granulosa cells. Granulosa cells develop early, but until and unless theca cells supply the raw materials, enough of estrogen cannot be formed. So there is a rise of estrogen once the theca cells mature and produce the androstenedione. Now then there is a moderate rise of estrogen level, when we find that the dominant follicle is gradually being selected. In this time, we find that under the inhibitory effect of the estrogen as well as the rising level of inhibin, we find there is a drop in the FSH level. LH level remains almost constant. So this we can say that the increased estrogen and inhibin has a more inhibitory effect on FSH than LH. So there is a drop in the FSH level, and that is why this coincides with the selection and maturation of the dominant follicle, because the criteria for dominant follicle selection, most important is that it should express more of LH and FSH receptor. LH is maintaining a constant level for the thecal cells, and FSH, though it's lowered, but we find that those which have expressed more of FSH receptors can sustain with this lower level of FSH. So it coincides with a dip of FSH when the other follicles undergo atresia, and only the dominant follicles which express more of LH and FSH receptor will survive. And then we find that there is a peak of estrogen. Estrogen gradually reaches a peak, and this 300 picogram per ml, this level has to be sustained for more than 36 hours. So at least 48 hours, if a peak of 300 picogram per ml of estrogen is reached or is being secreted, then this leads to LH surge, and it occurs about 24 hours after the estrogen peak. So 24 hours after the estrogen peak, we find there is the LH surge, and 9 hours after the LH surge, there is ovulation. So you see that LH surge is a bit earlier than the ovulation. This is the line of ovulation, and it is a bit earlier, 9 hours earlier, the LH surge occurs. And as we have said, that under the influence of increased LH, increased FSH, and the rising progesterone level, here you see that the progesterone level is in its rise. So rising progesterone level, we find that the ovulation has occurred. Now, after ovulation, during this time, we find there is a sharp fall of estrogen, because the granulosa cells are being disrupted. Some have gone out with a oocyte, and some are yet to be organized. So there is a sharp fall of estrogen, and with a sharp fall of estrogen, there is sharp fall of LH also. So this is called the LH surge. LH surge, a sharp rise and a sharp fall. And there is also a fall of the FSH with a for fall of estrogen and inhibin. The FSH also falls very quickly. And we find that this FSH decrease and LH decrease is not only not for the estrogen decrease, but due to the rise of progesterone. So progesterone is a very strong inhibitor of both LH and FSH, because you see that LH and FSH come down almost the same time when estrogen is going down, though it is moderately high, but the progesterone has gone up. So this moderately high level of estrogen still not gone to the basal level, and the rising of progesterone, this leads to a sharp decrease or sharp feedback inhibition of the pituitary gonadotrophins. And here there is also a moderate increase in the inhibin level as well. So there is a decrease in the LH and FSH. But the maximum influence during this luteal phase is due to high progesterone level. And here is the second peak of estrogen as well. So estrogen has a second peak due to the secretion from corpus luteum. So estrogen has two peaks. One peak pre-ovulatory, this is giving rise to LH surge, very high rise, about 300 picogram per ml. And then there is again a rise due to the corpus luteum secretion from the matured corpus luteum. It's being secreted, and so there is a rise. But the progesterone throughout the luteal phase, it maintains a very high level. So under the influence of estrogen, we find that there is the proliferative phase of the uterine cycle, that is the after the endometrial sloughing off. We find that during the proliferative phase, the spiral arteries and the functional endometrial layer, they proliferate. In this phase, there is very high mitotic index. A huge amount of proliferation occurs. The glands become tortuous. And in the secretory phase, under the influence of progesterone, we find that the glands become filled up with the glycogen. The arteries become more spiral, and the circulation is increased. And so now the endometrium becomes prepared for implantation of embryo. So this effect is more due to progesterone than estrogen. And the cervical mucus secretion also, we see under the progesterone effect, it is becoming thick, viscid, cannot be drawn into long threads, and the spin bucket, the Ferning test is negative. So this is the estrogen and progesterone, which remains high till say 22nd or 23rd day when the corpus luteum matures. Now, if there is no pregnancy, because of the lower LH and FSH level, especially LH, the mature corpus luteum cannot maintain its health. In case of pregnancy, the HCG starts secreting from the chorionic villus of placenta. So that will maintain the corpus luteum. But here, as there is no pregnancy, no HCG, and also there is low LH and FSH level, we find soon after say 23rd day, the corpus luteum undergoes luteolysis, forms corpus albicans, and so there is no secretion of progesterone and estrogen. So there is a sharp fall, and here we have seen that inhibin is also going into peak in the luteal phase, and that also keeps the FSH and LH level so low. Progesterone, estrogen, and inhibin, all three are quite high during the mid-luteal phase or the mid-secretory phase. Now, due to the luteolysis of the corpus luteum, there is sharp fall of progesterone, inhibin, and estrogen. And so the already LH FSH was low, and when the ovarian hormones decrease, they are not able to support such huge proliferation of the endometrium. Rather, there is stromal shrinkage, and the spiral artery, they undergo compression. So there is ischemic necrosis of the functional layer of the uterine endometrium, and it undergoes sloughing for first 5 days of the proliferative phase. So that is called the menstrual phase. So in this period, we see that there is minimum LH-FSH as well as minimum of estrogen progesterone. So the negative feedback of estrogen progesterone is lost. So subsequently, we find that again the FSH and LH goes into a rise. So here, along with the same picture of the ovarian and pituitary hormone, they have shown the body temperature. We see the temperature, which is around 36.5, now has gone to 37. So 0.5 degree to 1 degree rise throughout the luteal phase, throughout when the progesterone is high. So it is due to the thermogenic effect of progesterone that there is a rise in the body temperature. And here we find that the anterior pituitary hormone, there is an increase in the FSH as the in the initial phase of follicular phase, and as the estradiol is rising, there is a dip. But LH is maintaining its basal level, not much of dip there. And when estrogen is very high, 300 picogram or more than that for about more than 36 hours, then soon after, say 24 hours after this estradiol peak, we see there is the LH surge. And along with that, there is a FSH surge as well. And if you see the figure, then you see that ovulation comes just after it, about 9 hours after the LH peak, the peak of luteinizing hormone. And then under the effect of corpus luteum, we find the progesterone and estrogen both increases. This is the progesterone has single peak, but estrogen has 2 peaks, one in the follicular phase, the other in the luteal phase. And subsequently, when the corpus albicans is formed, the corpus luteum undergoes luteolysis, there is a fall of estrogen progesterone along with a lowering of the LH-FSH. So there is the sloughing of endometrium. And now again, as the negative feedback is gone, now the FSH and LH goes to a rise. So this way, to summarize the influence of hormones on the endometrial cycle, on the menstrual cycle, both the ovarian and the endometrial, we can see that at the menstruation, there is very low level of estrogen progesterone as well as LH-FSH, because LH-FSH was under the inhibitory effect of estrogen, progesterone, as well as inhibin we have seen. So both estrogen and LH and FSH have maintaining a very basal level. Now during menstruation, we find that there is sudden decrease in the estrogen progesterone. So there is removal of this negative feedback. So there is gradual increase mainly in the FSH. LH is maintaining a basal level, FSH from the pituitary gland. And under the influence of FSH, there is increased estradiol secretion because there is folliculogenesis, the granulosa and the theca cells, they differentiate. The theca cells are also under the influence of LH, basal level of LH. And finally, the hormone synthesis, estradiol synthesis from the follicle occurs. Now, as estradiol rises, here this statement is absolutely wrong. There is negative feedback on FSH. So there is decreased FSH level. during this time, not only because of estradiol, but because also of another hormone which is called inhibin. So here there is decrease of FSH level due to negative feedback. But the estradiol goes on its rise and rise more than 300 picogram per ml, a very high rise for more than 48 hours, will now remove the inhibition from the KNDY neurons. Rather, it will overwhelmingly stimulate the kisspeptin neuron. And this kisspeptin from KNDY as well as from the perioptic nucleus will activate, and there is mid-cycle LH surge along with a mid-cycle FSH. So both KNDY as well as the perioptic kisspeptin neuron gets activated, and they leads to the mid-cycle LH and FSH surge. And this LH surge with increase in progesterone and FSH will lead to ovulation, as we all know. So due to the ovulation, there is discharge of ovum into the peritoneal cavity, and the rest of the follicle now organizes into corpus luteum. So there is luteinization of the follicle. Corpus luteum is again a very important endocrine organ, secretes more of progesterone and also definitely estradiol. And inhibin is also being secreted during this phase, and they all rises inhibiting the LH and FSH level during this luteal phase. But as LH and FSH is so low that corpus luteum undergoes atresia, it cannot maintain its health because there is no LH. If there is pregnancy, the HCG, beta unit of HCG, very similar to LH, will maintain the health of corpus luteum. Otherwise, it will undergo luteolysis, and so there is decreased estrogen and progesterone secretion, sudden drop. And that removes the negative feedback. But in the meantime, the proliferated functional layer of the endometrium can no more survive because of the sudden decrease in estrogen progesterone level. There is stromal shrinkage, and the spiral arteries, corkscrew arteries, they are compressed to undergo ischemic necrosis. So the menstrual secretion sloughing of the endometrium occurs, and at the same time, due to the removal of negative feedback, we see again there is increase in the FSH and FSH mainly, and under the influence of FSH, new follicles are being recruited, and there is increased secretion of estradiol. And at the same time, we see that when the FSH is inhibited, there is dominant follicle is being secreted, and the dominant follicle secrete huge amount of estradiol, so that it leads to the mid-follicular LH and FSH surge due to the overwhelming effect of kisspeptin neuron in the GnRH secretion. So this is, in summary, the effect of hormone on the menstrual cycle of a female. So this is all for today, and the non-pregnant female reproductive system has been completed. Now you will switch over to the changes in pregnancy, lactation, and what are the means of contraception. Thank you very much. Thank you all.